Hi, everybody. It's Lauren, and welcome to the Zen Blonde podcast. So, today I'm deep diving into Elizabeth Holmes. If you don't know who Elizabeth Holmes is, she was the founder of a company called Theranos that promised to deliver blood test results off a prick of a finger. And it ended up being one of the biggest fraudulent cases in Silicon Valley. And I'm joined today by my guest, Kate Casey. Kate had a tremendous career in political PR. She was actually a White House intern during the Lewinsky era. And then she moved her show out west. She had 5 kids and is doing all of that while still being a titan in the podcast world and also answering my text messages. I don't know how she finds time to sleep. Welcome to the show, Kate. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. No, I love a good deep dive. Love it. Love it.
Well, I figured you would be the perfect person to chat with us about, since you truly have an anecdote for almost everything and you're just the most interesting person I know. So, Kate, when did you first hear about Elizabeth Holmes?
I actually heard about her or not that far, but before people were familiar with her from the Forbes cover. My husband works in tech in the healthcare space, so I was familiar with her story. What's interesting is he always doubted it, working in that space, and his other friends in Silicon Valley would say, no, she's the real deal. This is a big deal. And I just think it's interesting looking back in retrospect. And I think it's because people in Silicon Valley were enthralled by the story of a female CEO. And I think in the end, it did a tremendous amount of damage to females who work in tech and who work in healthcare, life science, and science, or biotechnology.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was one of those things where we all wanted it to be true because we all wanted to have this Steve Jobs-esque icon that was a female to look up to. And I think, that was one of the interesting things about Elizabeth. The Hulu show that's coming out, which is why I wanted to do this week because I'm so excited for it, is called The Dropout. And she, like Steve Jobs and I think Bill Gates too, she dropped out of Stanford at the age of 19 to start this business. And I think the undercurrent that nobody talks about is like she had to have a tremendous amount of privilege in conjunction with this
Oh,
pipe
for sure.
dream.
I get fired up about that too. She came from a very wealthy, connected family. I think what's surprising to people is that throughout her experience, to her professional experience and in building this company, was she was never really providing concrete data. It was the idea. And
Right.
I think that sometimes through not just Silicon Valley, but other areas, especially in the last like 10 years, that sometimes people get high off the flames of an idea. And I think that this was one of those examples. But yeah, she absolutely came from privilege. She drops out of school. I think she presented herself as somebody who was probably far more intellectual and somehow conned a series of people who were investors. It began with her first professor, conned them into thinking that she had the wherewithal to build a company, to run a company, and to actually build a product that never actually existed.
100%. And, I think looking at it from the framework of like Steve Jobs and Larry Ellison and some of the people that she looked up to. Larry Ellison is from Oracle. He was an investor. One of the things that's come up time and time again is like, Steve Jobs sold a video game to Atari before he even had it, and he made Steve Wozniak make it for him and then got the additional money that was kind of like the extra bonus. You have Bill Gates, who sold something before it was made. It was something to do with a mainframe computer. And the same thing with Larry Ellison from Oracle. He would make something a version 2, even if it was version 1, to make it seem more legitimate. And he would sell things before he even developed them. But the difference with Elizabeth Holmes is it was medical. So she was impacting people's health decisions and impacting people's lives, as opposed to just an app not delivering your food on time or something of that nature, which I think
Yeah,
made it
she
more
conned
serious.
people. Yeah, there was a hope that we were on the cusp of this enormous breakthrough in technology that would really change the course of science and health. And I mean, there's so many things that went wrong with this, and it's just a sad story because there it could have been so much better. On top of it, I think there is an element to her that's a little bit Lance Armstrong-esque, where she got into a position of power, and then as people started to ask questions and whistleblowers started to come forward, she was so retaliatory, and that's why so many people stayed quiet for some time until the bravery of the ultimate whistleblower. Of course, he came forward, and his father was a member of the board, George Schultz, and she terrified him. And so it's kind of an interesting story in terms of what can happen when someone gets drunk with power, and how they can terrify employees. And sometimes the period of time where the truth comes out is elongated because people are terrified.
And what was so interesting about her was she leaned on her like hero origin story so heavily. And when reporters and journalists she wanted to control that narrative. So when they tried to veer, she would get really uncomfortable because her whole story was, my uncle had cancer. He was gone too soon. I want preventable diagnostics. People can have these machines in their homes and they can be ubiquitous like an iPhone. And, you know, it was just so interesting because when people tried to veer from that, for example, somebody from the New Yorker, she told him to get into contact with her contact at the FDA, who was at the top of the food chain, so way too far up the food chain to know what was being submitted and what lab results were being submitted, et cetera. When the reporter went to somebody in the FDA that was actually handling these reports, and that person said, hey, you know, they haven't submitted all of their data, she was really taken aback. She didn't know how to handle it. And she was like, well, now you're getting into privileged information. So it was
that was
really
always her go-to. You could only go so far with her because, and I think also having a boyfriend that was a member of the executive committee also helped that, but you couldn't really ask her any information without her being so defensive, which to me is obviously a huge red flag. But what do you do when you're a member of this company, like a functioning employee or a member of an executive committee, and you're doubting yourself? You're thinking this doesn't add up, but you have some of the most wealthy people in business and in finance who really believe so strongly in her. What do you do? So I think that's what I think people are most excited to see play out on screen, because it's a lot of what was happening behind the story, this behind the scenes, that is most interesting. Another very fascinating thing with her is her personality coupled with the conning. For example, she completely changed her voice to mimic Steve Jobs. She mimicked his outfits. She was basically playing the part of this imaginary person, and people bought it. And so people who grew up with her were like, that's not the way she used to speak. She embellished details of her childhood. There's a series of things that show that she's a pathological liar, and that she probably has some sort of a personality disorder.
No, absolutely. I mean, I thought it was so interesting. Like, literally, she found out Steve Jobs had his marketing meetings on Wednesdays, and so she started having her marketing meeting. It's like Regina George. She started having her marketing meeting on Wednesday.
Legit crazy.
With the same marketing team.
She didn't want anybody to go. She wanted to set the tone that I never go home from work. So she would just eat in her office and be there all day. And then
she only had bottled water in the fridge at home.
Then it made the other employees feel like they had to stay that long. But I mean, part of that too is like youth and naivety. I think she was obviously quite insecure. She was quite young. All of the employees are so much older than her. She's got investors who are like 70 years old, and she's fantasizing that she's Steve Jobs adjacent. And so she's come up with this idea of how a CEO operates and how they should run a team. And she had absolutely no idea what she was doing.
Well, it was really important for her to let us all know that she had the same outfit every day, and that was the only thing in her closet, and it's because she needed to eliminate that decision from her day to day. And she
Which was not, that was
cosplaying.
bullshit. She wore it because it was more like Steve Jobs.
And I'm pretty sure she got the same turtleneck as him. I think it was like Issey Miyake, like I'm almost positive.
No, she's crazy.
So she was really trying to cosplay this man, and then it was like she was doing something in medicine. So when Theranos was going on, she told everyone that they were using the proprietary machines, meaning if you went into the Theranos Wellness Clinic, which by the way, they opened like 40 of them through Walgreens, and they had a huge deal with Safeway. If you went in, you were to believe that you were going to be getting this little prick of blood, which I hate getting blood taken. I just delayed a blood taking situation for so long. I had to reschedule a doctor's appointment, and my mom
don't
went
have a
with me.
baby.
Oh,
Don't have a baby because you'll be
truly
screwed.
won't. I truly won't because I get faint at the sight of blood. Even watching the Elizabeth Holmes stuff is like hard for me. But what was really going on is either they were taking venous like samples, or they were using your little blood prick on not their machines, but they were taking third-party machines like Simon's, and they were diluting this little prick of blood, and then people were getting wildly inaccurate results. So there was 3 people that took the stand. There was the one woman that thought she had HIV. There was one woman who thought she'd miscarried, so she stopped taking the necessary medicines for her pregnancy, and thank God delivered a healthy baby, but it could have gone really, really awry. And then there was another man who completely changed his blood clotting medicine because they were like, oh, your blood is way too thick, and he'd been taking medicine to thin his blood. So there were people that were actually impacted by this. And I don't know if you heard about, did you hear about Ian Gibbons, the employee of hers that committed suicide?
I did.
So, I mean, what she was doing behind the scenes, Ian Gibbons was a 67-year-old man. He had 60 patents under him. The way that they patented things in the Theranos office, Elizabeth, should have given some credit to Ian for a lot of those patents, but the way that her patent writer was writing it, it was just all credit was to Elizabeth, and I don't even think this man cared. But there was some sort of deposition going on, and he was going to have to answer some questions, and he was terrified about losing his job at that age, starting all over again at 67. So he took a bunch of pills, and a week later he was dead. And his wife reached out to Theranos. All they ever reached out to her about was getting all their company materials back.
Trademarks, yeah.
Never
intellectual
had
property.
A memorial. Never called to say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. It was just like so stone cold. So in the moments that I have pings of feeling bad for Elizabeth Holmes when I feel like some of this stuff is rooted in misogyny. Because I'm like, okay, man, like the things that we have to do in a workplace to be taken seriously by men, like do we have to alter our voices? Do we have to do these things, right, to be taken seriously? And then I remember the human cost of what she did, and that's when I stopped feeling bad for her altogether.
I feel no empathy for her at all. Not
Yeah.
at all, because she did a huge disservice to other women, and women who are seeking funding, women that are seeking positions as executive members, women building companies. She set all of those women back because ultimately, for the last couple years, they're faced with questions of, how are you similar to Theranos? And those are companies that have nothing to do in the health or biotech space, all because of what she's done. So I have zero empathy for her.
And those people are in the shadow of that sort of bad situation, which is awful because it's hard enough for women in STEM. And I think a bunch of women in STEM, my sister was a woman in STEM, they all looked at her as somebody to look up to, and it's so awful. And so with the trial, I'm curious because I think we've kind of painted this like character profile of Elizabeth where it's like she's kind of cold and unfeeling. I mean, to let that guy.
Some people have suggested that she's actually on the spectrum, which makes sense to me, because there's something that is definitely not. Doesn't seem neurotypical.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I'm curious what you make of like her having a baby right before the trial. Do you think that was a strategy? Like, do you think she was like gone girling us? Because like a part of me kind of feels that way. A part of me feels like, is she that?
I'm gonna go like 80% manipulative. I don't know. It's hard not to think that when the gentleman that she married is the heir to a fortune, which affords her the opportunity to pay all those legal fees, and then a child would, delay and also make the court look at her with more sensitivity. Remember the Menendez trial with Leslie Abrams, and she had them wear like pink and blue sweaters for the jury to look at them more with more concern and kindness. I think that stuff matters. And one would be crazy not to think that her legal team was like, by the way, they don't want to put a woman who just had is nursing a baby in jail. And they made a point of saying that she was a nursing mother during the trial, as if that's any of our business.
100%. And it's interesting to think of the language they used. And they actually had her take the stand. And, I was looking into like why they did that and why that was part of the strategy. But Elizabeth knows how to work a room, and she knows how to manipulate.
But does she though?
I mean,
but I feel like she did, but
people.
Now, but not now. I do think that there are different times too. Like I mentioned, I think that was a period of time where there was much more investment and people were less scrupulous about companies. Now they need data. I mean, you see it in the IPOs that happen. I mean, it's a longer process and it's not as easy as I think it was in the Theranos day. And like I said, I think that people were taken by the story of a young woman. And so I think it was just a cacophony of craziness.
I think too, another interesting thing about the defense was like, she used the Svengali defense. So Sunny Balwani was somebody she met when she was 19. She was doing a program in Hong Kong. She was very proficient at Mandarin. Her family actually made sure of that. And there's actually a doctor that lived next door to them who spoke Arabic. His name was George Fuse, and they actually got into a lawsuit together, and he spoke out a lot against her. But her parents wanted her to know Mandarin so she would have a better station in life because it was like the language to learn, especially even when I was in high school, it was like learn Mandarin. So she meets Sunny Balwani on the Stanford trip, and he ends up being the guy on the board who, when she sinks the Series A money, which was like $60 million, he loans her $14 million, but then he's on the board and then he's involved. But then they're also a couple. So now, as the defense was going on, Sunny Balwani, she was using the Svengali defense, which she was saying she was in an abusive relationship, and maybe she was. I don't think that caused her to lie and defraud people and all those things. But he did have some pretty epic explosions in office, and at the same time, I think like both things can be true at once without being intertwined, because she seemed like in the defense, they had all the text messages come out of, and what I thought was really interesting is she was such a control freak, Kate, that she knew when John Carreyrou was coming to Arizona to try to get that blood test to see if he was going to get the finger prick. She had PIs on it. She had people on it. She was texting Sunny Balwani.
So it makes you go, the Sunny Balwani Svengali approach is bullshit.
100%. Whether or not he was abusive, that's awful if he was abusive. You and I are both like champions for women, which is partially, I think, why you and I get fired up about this, because we want all the other women in STEM to have a fighting chance, and this just left like a bad taste in people's mouth. But with that Svengali defense, it was like when they went through the text messages in the trial, it was like, okay, but you're saying your lab, they called it Normandy, is a mess. Like, that these things are happening. That you're using these third-party machines and trying to like do a workaround. So it's just really, really like one of the craziest cases I think I've ever seen. And I know I asked you this before, but you're not gonna put this on your must-watch list because you only do reality, but are you gonna watch the Dropout?
Reality and documentary. So I do unscripted. So anything in the unscripted space. So I'm not, unless I start to watch it and think by the end of the week, people have to watch this. I usually modify my list for Friday if I add something just for a great weekend with or a must-watch list. So I'll watch a little bit. If it blows my hair back, I'll add it. But traditionally, I just include unscripted. So I think I included when there was more of a documentary style version of this.
Right, because they did the HBO one.
I included that one. What was it called? It was called the Inventor.
The Inventor, yeah, and that one was really interesting.
So I covered that, but I'm not probably going to cover it just because it's actors acting, and ultimately for me, the real people are more interesting anyway. Like, although I'm sure Amanda Seyfried is a fantastic actress in the role of Elizabeth Holmes, I like to see the horrible like mahogany lipstick with the tank top and the terrible frizzled hair. I like to see the real person. I feel like they made Amanda Seyfried almost too pretty.
Kate, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, you know what? They needed, first of
I
all,
was like,
they
I
needed
like
to
that red
cast,
lip.
like,
I want to get that lipstick. Yeah.
I mean, the Elizabeth Holmes red.
Yeah.
They needed to get like Gwyneth Paltrow and like a few like tweaked prosthetics to like make her a little bit more Elizabeth Holmes. Like, I
She's
feel
too
like
old.
she,
No,
re-
you need somebody more age appropriate.
I feel
You
like,
need somebody taller too. Amanda Seyfried's too short.
well, so is Jennifer Lawrence, who's going to play her in the movie, because now there's two competing things that are going on.
Oh yeah.
But
I
I'm
think
right there
this
with
might
you.
be too much. This might be too much Elizabeth Holmes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like maybe we've all covered this enough.
Yeah. You know what? I think the stories that really interest me. So there was this one girl, Erica Chung, who was a whistleblower, and I listened to her TED Talk, and she rose like against all odds. I think she grew up living in a trailer with like her family, and like she would tell everyone she wanted to go to Berkeley, and they would be like, yeah, well, great, I want to be an astronaut. And she rose up against all odds and created this amazing STEM career for herself. And Theranos was her first job out of college. And then she's in the lab being told that she is wrong and that she's misunderstanding something when she's trying to raise concerns. And so she and Tyler Schultz together were the two whistleblowers. And then you have to think about Tyler, who's a completely different position, where his grandfather is George Schultz, like so invested in this business, but he was the former Secretary of State, I believe.
He was.
So he fully believed Elizabeth, even when his grandson was coming to him saying, Grandpa, like what you're seeing as the veneer on the outside of this is not what's really going on in the lab and what's going on the internally. And so it was just such a crazy thing to
And also Elizabeth
see.
was calling and leaving voicemails or calling Tyler and terrifying him with
terrifying
threats
everyone.
of retaliation.
She had the same legal watchdog as like Harvey Weinstein. So she had him going after people, like even in like the company parking lot, being like, you revealed some information and you've given up company secrets. And, you know, imagine being like 23 years old. Like the girl, Erica Chung, like she didn't have a leg to stand on. She didn't have a rich family that was going to come and support her. Tyler Schultz had a little bit different of a situation. So I know in a matter of a few months, his family spent $500,000 fighting Elizabeth, his parents. But then Elizabeth was still going to his family's functions, which I was like, that is something only somebody that's really crazy can be able to show their face when you're, you know, dismissing this person's.
That
like,
reminds
beliefs.
me, when the Inventor came out, I contacted him, and he said he wasn't ready to do interviews yet. He was still traumatized, or in the, you know, he wasn't in a place in his life where he was ready to talk. So I hope that he feels much better now.
I've seen him do a few interviews, and I could not find him online, but I did find his wedding registry, so I think he's getting married, so things are going great for him.
Oh, he went offline? Oh.
I couldn't find Tyler
Did
Schultz
I?
anywhere online, like, but he might have been on and then gotten off because, you know, that's the way things go. But the other thing, Kate, the Wall Street,
I wonder if he still is on. Are you sure he's not on?
I
Because
couldn't
I
find him
DM'd
anywhere.
with him.
I mean, I'm sure he was at some point, but maybe it got too overwhelming. Maybe even in the lead up to the dropout,
That may
he
have
doesn't want to be.
happened.
Because, I mean, it can happen to people. But, you know, what's also crazy is with the Wall Street Journal story, which is really one of the things that cracked this open, Rupert Murdoch, who owns the Wall Street Journal, was, you know, invested in Theranos. And then Elizabeth Holmes was trying to get the Wall Street Journal story shut down, the John Carreyrou story, through Rupert. And Rupert said, I trust the editors to tell the truth.
Good for him. Thank God.
I mean, yeah, if you give him credit for anything. I mean, it's crazy when you think about who lost money in this, because Betsy DeVos, I think her family lost $100 million in this. And it's just crazy the amount of wealth and just how this was.
Then I
such
go
a
back
scam
to,
business.
it's amazing to me that families like that, or individuals with that much life or business experience and wealth, would not have pursued data, like proof. No one did.
Do you think
They
it
just
was
went off
because
on
it
the
was the Wild
idea.
West? Like, do you think it was because it was the Wild West?
I think it was
at this
that.
time?
I think it was a bunch of investors that wanted a piece of the pie. I mean, listen, if it's a great story, you see a woman on the cover of Forbes and she's going to change the way that we do blood testing. Like, that's an amazing story. And I think people, when it comes to companies and IPOs or going public or anything, the people smell the fish in the water and they want to be part of it. It's a cautionary tale, and I think you have seen a huge difference since then.
Yeah, and she
And
always
we all
liked to
should
say,
be more skeptical. We should be more skeptical. Like, I don't know, does this make sense?
she always liked to say, first they tell you you're crazy, then they fight you, and then you
All
change
the
the
time she
world.
repeat that. Then you choose. I was like, okay, settle down. It reminded me of like Keith Raniere and Nexium. Like, he's the smartest man in the world. We're going to save the world. Same thing that like Scientologists say. I mean, it's really like, you're just a company. Like, you're going to change the world. I don't know.
And you know what? The other thing I will say is the people that I know, my sister was in
You
biomedical
know what changed the
engineering.
world? You know what changed the world? Like cream cheese. I don't know,
That's what
something
you're
like
going to say,
that.
sliced bread.
Something like that.
I'm like
Right.
Uber Eats. No, I think it's one of those things where my sister was in biomedical engineering, and she's amazing. She gave a TED talk. She used 3D printers to build affordable prosthetics for kids. And so the reason she wanted to do that, it had nothing to do with her ego. She never brings it up. I'm like her proud sister, so I bring it up any chance I can get because I think she's amazing. But the thing is, she never brings it up. But the reason why she wanted to do that had nothing to do with her ego. It had to do with seeing people suffering and being so frustrated and having that engineering brain and wanting to solve the problem. With Elizabeth, it was like she saw nothing but the dollar sign. When Ebola was happening, Elizabeth was dead set on like how she could gear Theranos towards Ebola. When she came back from China, SARS had broken out. That when she had done the first program there to like the Mandarin intensive or whatever, she saw dollar signs when she saw SARS. And I know that people think that way, and people can be very contrived. Like, you could look at like Terry Dubrow
Yeah.
and Heather selling the like $30 hand sanitizer. Like, people do monopolize or capitalize on bad situations, but that was like her only end seemed to be becoming this like Steve Jobs like figurehead. The glory of it all, and like maybe money, but I really think power and status were more important to her than anything. And it's just
There's
crazy.
such a level of a level of delusion with her too, because it's from my understanding. I just remembered that I think I had. It's like this stuff comes up. I think I had lunch in Sausalito with one of the employees, or it was like a friend of one of the employees, and they said that she still, all these years later, really believes what she did was fine. So how do you communicate with somebody who has no sense of what they did was wrong? It's crazy. Like, I think there's something absolutely wrong with her. There's some sort of personality disorder.
No, I think there has to be, because I think it's at the point where she believes her own lie, and I think it's like
crazy.
it's very much ingrained in her. Well, before we hop off, I'm very excited for the Dropout, but I really, 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 really want to ask you about your time as a White House intern, because this is one of those
Oh
things
God.
that really interests me. So Kate was an intern during like the Monica Lewinsky era, and I think it's the most fascinating
Yeah.
thing. You did the whole DC thing. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, I was an intern twice. When I was a freshman, I had this boarding school that I had gone to. There was a member of the board who was Vice President Gore's, the press secretary for Vice President Gore's reinventing government. So I got my foot in the door as a freshman. And so when I was a junior, I applied again. And because I was living in DC, apparently that you're at an advantage to get an internship during the fall semester. So I got one, and they gave me an internship at the lower press office. So there's upper and lower press office. Upper press office is like you're going into the briefings, and you're working with like the press secretary on World News Tonight, 60 Minutes, those. But the lower press is more regional press. But as in the intern there, one of the interns, namely me, had to go to the old executive building at like 5:30 in the morning and pour through all the stacks of newspapers to see what was covered, what part of the administration's work was covered in basically the section A of each newspaper. Now, all these years later, you could just do that with like setting it up on LexisNexis or some Google News or something. But back then, you'd have to go take the newspaper, cut it out, make a copy. It was awful. So that was my job. And then after I compiled the packets, I'd have to go into the West Wing and drop off all the packets to all the desks. So I was there before people even arrived at the Oval Office. So I would go through with my little badge, and I would drop off at Betty Curry's desk and like the Oval Office desk and
So
all
you
of
were
that.
at the Oval Office by yourself, like early in the morning, just casually
Early in
dropping
the
off like
morning.
a ton of clippings before the president even stepped
Yeah,
in.
like I'd carry a stack, and then I would go and I would drop them off.
Was that like so surreal for
Okay.
you, or did you just get so used to it?
No, I never got over it, and I think they moved the paintings around for each administration. But when Bill Clinton was there, there's this one hallway that you kind of go through. It was small, and they had a table with this painting of William McKinley, and so I'm actually a descendant of William McKinley. So it was just kind of special to just think here, here I was at this incredible piece of place in American history and how our lives intersect. And at that time, I really believed that I would work in politics for the rest of my life, and that I would change the way that systems work or be part of it. So not change the world for any anyway, but yeah, I just loved it. I thought I would end up in politics. So it was really an incredible moment. And then so as the story broke, I just thought, what? Because the coverage was like she was in the Oval Office with him, and I just thought of my own self, like as an intern with a badge on. Like I felt like I was watched all the time, and I couldn't conceive the thing that I was naive about was not that affairs happen, but I was naive about how the system works. I thought because of checks and balances that if the president was doing something wrong, that somebody would tell. And as I got older, I realized it's much more complicated. Like when you have employees and they want to keep jobs, or they don't want to be somebody that creates havoc, or all of those things become much more cloudier as you get older. So that's what I remember most was this, disbelief that it could have ever happened. And I think I have far more empathy as I've gotten older for Monica and for Hillary, um, as the wife and as also the woman that was with the president.
Yeah, I mean, I think Monica was like the first example as a young girl that I saw like splashed across every front page as like this like slut shaming situation where it's like,
Yeah.
I think that the conversation around these things and the imbalance of power is so different now than it was then. And it's just crazy to me that you were there for all the
I
unfolding
know.
of that as an intern. I mean, you have so many amazing like stories, but that's one that I always go back to because I mean, that was probably the first time where I was able to have consciousness around a story like that. I was still pretty young.
Yeah.
But it was the same thing with Princess Diana. It happened she passed away right when I was
Oh, well,
old enough.
no,
You know?
that happened at the same time because I was an intern when she died, and I had to go in the next day and go through the newspapers, and every paper that I would see was like, Diana's dead, Diana's dead. That ran during the East Coast feed of Saturday Night Live. Brian Williams came on the air and said, Princess, we have now have information, and we believe that Princess Diana died. We all thought it was a sketch. We all thought it was made up.
Oh my
And then the
God.
next day, it was like clip. And then I went in every day. And then I remember it was like towards the end of the week, and it was the funeral. And then the Monday, all the papers were pictures of the casket and the card that said mummy. And then all my roommates and we went down to the embassy, and there was a long line. I mean, you could go through it and see my name in it. Like I waited in line with my roommates to just sign like a condolence book. And I remember just thinking how surprised it was, just mesmerizing, all the people that wanted to wait in line to write in the book and just to honor the family. And there was a pile of flowers, and there were people that left cards from their families to Princess Diana. And some that were open, it was like, Dear Princess Diana, thank you for all you did for, charities, love the MacArthur family, or whatever, with all the kids. But there was this one person that was like a full-length mirror that you get at Home Depot, and they had written a letter, and it was like bananas, like with lipstick or something on the mirror. It was
Oh,
like, how dare they take you? Your blood is like all over, whatever. And then they took a wax and they threw it on the mirror. So it was just like wax on the mirror with this crazy message, and they put it right with all the flowers. And I just remember standing there thinking, my God, like people, the reaction to that was so wildly different from one end to the other. But yeah, we waited in line for hours and hours. And my one roommate said something like, you know, in the city, we would take a 40 and pour it over a grave or something. It was just the craziest thing. I don't know. It was crazy.
That was such a wild time. And yeah, I, again, was like 5, but those were like some of my first memories of being a precocious child, like listening in on adult conversations. And I remember all the moms were crying over Diana, but it's crazy that you were a part of that history. And Kate, you just always have the best anecdotes. Thank you so much for coming on. I know you have to jump, but tell everyone where they can find you. You were amazing.
Thank you. Anywhere where you listen to podcasts, Reality Life with Kate Casey, Facebook group, Reality Life with Kate Casey, Twitter @Kate Casey, Instagram @KateCaseyCA, TikTok, it's Kate Casey, Patreon, patreon.com/Kate Casey. And the must watch list that I put out every Monday, which is a guide to what to watch and unscripted, is available at katecasey.substack.com.
Amazing. Well, Kate, thanks so much for coming on. And everyone go give Kate a follow. She's one of my favorite podcasters and just all around great human. And I just joined the Facebook group. It's awesome. So you guys have to get on there.
Oh, good. Good.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you guys so much for coming on today. And I hope you enjoyed our conversation about Elizabeth Holmes. And I'll see you all next week.